I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. A Catholic Charities Senior Center in Queens gets an extreme makeover. But are the social programs seniors rely on most also up for a renovation?
All the things that I do here, I appreciate every one of them, and I wouldn't want anything to be taken away from me.
Plus, the feds want all insurance plans to pay for contraceptives. But do religious exemptions in the plan go far enough? And trading in one white collar for another, one man finds his calling.
God has a unique role for each one of us in his plan of salvation.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Ty Pennington may not have been there, but over the weekend, the Peter J. Della Monica Catholic Charities Senior Center got an extreme makeover. There were no shouts of "move that bus" or anything like that, though. An enthusiastic group of young ladies from St. John's University volunteered their time and their talent to make the Astoria Queens Center just a bit brighter. But that wasn't the only renovation on people's minds. With the proposed changes to Medicare and Medicaid in President Barack Obama's newly unveiled deficit reduction plan, everyone at the center, the young at heart, weighed in on the impact of the proposed changes on seniors today and the seniors of tomorrow.
St. John's University has students that volunteer with Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens annually, and they come and help us beautify our centers across the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens.
Once a year, every fall, the whole university comes together and we take one day out of our weekend to do service around the community. Today we're doing service at Catholic Charities Brooklyn and Queens, and we're painting the Senior Center.
We're a part of Greek life, and Greek life is all about philanthropy and coming together, and this is just a great opportunity to not just come together as just like our individual group, but as a school.
This is a pretty big center. We have 3 levels here. So to maintain 3 levels, it requires the help and the assistance of partners of Home Depot, partnerships with St. John University, partnerships with KBM Vending that come in and help us do it and keep a professional job done.
Most of the people that come here, they lost their spouse. Most of them, they're all alone. It's a place to gather. It's a place to get together. You get away from solitude.
Well, it keeps me going. It keeps, in my elderly years, when I'm over, like that senior, I get up in the morning, I get dressed, and I know I have a place to go. I don't have to sit home and look at 4 walls.
I now come almost every day for lunch because I enjoy the meals here. This place is very, very friendly, and I love it.
I do sometimes worry that in my older age, I won't find the same support as elderly people now, just because of the financial crises that the country is going through and things of that nature.
I've seen some bad changes. I mean, it's unbelievable. The deficit is so bad, they're cutting all kinds of things from people that took it for granted that they would have. I mean, not only senior citizens, but the country as a whole. I don't know, I mean, it's a great country, but what the hell's going on with us?
We worked very hard all our life for our money. We shouldn't have to share it. But if people are working, they get their regular money, and they save it just like we did. Because nothing stays the same. I would like we would get more money, but it don't work that way.
They were at one point young, and they did get back to the country their whole life, as we are now as young individuals. So I feel in their golden years, in their senior years now, they shouldn't be asked to give back.
Well, I worked all my life, too. I came from Europe. I was born in Italy, and all the things that I do here, I appreciate every one of them, and I wouldn't want anything to be taken away from me.
A deficit of what, $10 trillion or some of that sort? I mean, how are we going to make that up? Where are you going to get it? You're going to get it from the future generations. That's all. You're going to sacrifice the future generation. That's the way it goes.
And it seems as though my children and my grandchildren won't get the opportunity that I have. I'm afraid that it might change, but I may not be around to see it, but I sure hope it doesn't.
And there is some news to report on the budget front, some mixed news out of Washington. The good news, last night the Senate did approve a temporary spending bill to keep the government running, but the bad news is, well, it only keeps it running through November 18th. Stay with us. There's much more currents ahead. First New York, now San Francisco may be the next city to set new requirements on some pregnancy centers. We'll have that story, plus the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, it's never too late to find your true vocation. A Brooklyn priest shares his story. But first, we'll have a look at the day's headlines. First New York, now San Francisco. A committee there has advanced a bill requiring pregnancy centers to disclose whether they perform abortions and provide emergency contraception. One of the bill's co-sponsors says it's designed to protect women from going to a center only to find out it does not provide abortions or contraception. Now, the head of one of the pro-life clinics in San Francisco says the law attacks one group of centers but not another group. It's not clear whether the measure will get the support of San Francisco's Board of Supervisors. Now, the bill is similar to New York City's Bill 371. The City Council passed that bill earlier this year, but its enforcement is currently on hold while it faces a legal challenge. Well, meanwhile, a judge in Illinois says he will not reverse a ruling on adoption and foster care contracts with Catholic Charities. The judge had ruled that Illinois could cancel the contracts over Catholic Charities' policy to not grant adoptions to or place children with unmarried couples. A new law that went into effect this year gives Illinois couples in civil unions the same rights as married couples. Catholic Charities says it will appeal. Well, news now on the NFL contract hammered out over the summer, something you might not think you'll hear about here on Currents, but among the new provisions, a formal ban on discriminating against players based on their sexual orientation. Now, the Huffington Post is reporting that it's included in a phrase that also bans discrimination based on race, religion, and national origin. Now, it's not clear whether the players or owners pushed for the new measure. Well, from Tennessee, a warning for a group of high school football coaches who bowed their heads during a student-led prayer. Josh Devine has that story.
In a town like this,
we're just respectful, God-fearing people up here.
Faith and football seem to matter. Just ask Tony Bennell, who called games for Westmoreland High School for 42 years.
A lot of history, a lot of changes, a lot of football.
So when he, like a lot of people, heard what happened after a recent game at the middle school,
it actually blew my mind that we had, come to that point. And nobody in this town is offended if you pray. Nobody.
During a student-originated, student-led prayer, 4 coaches bowed their heads. They didn't say a word, but the principal and the district still found out.
We've been telling our principals to kind of be looking for those kind of things because that is kind of a shift in how things have been done. Can in no way appear like it's endorsed by Sumner County Schools personnel.
So a bowing of the head could qualify as endorsing?
It depends on what it looks like. That's where you kind of get into the gray area that we're having to deal with.
Each coach had to sign a letter stating he understood the district's revised policy. Staff can be there when students pray, but cannot appear to take part, even outside school hours. The tougher policy came just months after the American Civil Liberties Union sued the district, arguing it violated separation of church and state. But in the push to stay legal and steer clear of another lawsuit, some in this town would say the district is going entirely too far.
That's a violation of their rights. We should be able to bow our heads in reverence to God wherever we are. It's time we draw a line in the sand and say, this is ridiculous.
That report from Josh Devine. Well, from Green Bay, it was one man's priceless guitar, and it was swiped from his casket. Police say a worker at a Catholic cemetery in the Diocese of Green Bay confessed to stealing the Fender Telecaster as the cemetery was preparing the man's burial. The man's daughter says her father's dying wish was to be buried with the guitar and that the family is upset the thief was released on bond.
And to give a cash bond or a signature bond? Are you serious? Do you know what we have to go through as a family because of what he did to our father?
Our number one priority now is working with the family of the deceased so that we can assist them in reaching the closure, though, that they so well deserve.
The employee faces up to 10 years in prison and a $25,000 fine if convicted. The first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize has died. Wangari Maathai, an environmentalist from Kenya, died on Sunday after battling cancer. She was 71 years old. Maathai was Catholic. She started the Green Belt movement more than 30 years ago in an effort to battle deforestation. The movement has planted more than 40 million trees. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her efforts to promote sustainable development, democracy, and peace. From Iran, at least one Protestant pastor is willing to die for his faith. The pastor was sentenced to death last year for abandoning Islam. He was told he would be spared from execution if he converted back to Islam, but at two separate court hearings this week, he has refused to leave the Christian faith. He will have two more chances to return to Islam, but he'll be executed if he continues to refuse. Well, back in this country, a new survey shows more Americans are against Palestinian statehood than are in favor of it. The survey from the Pew Research Center shows 42% of Americans oppose statehood for Palestine, while only 26% support it. The remaining 32% do not know where they stand. The UN Security Council is currently debating a request from Palestine to be granted statehood. It's a request that both the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem and Caritas Jerusalem support, and one that the U.S. says it will veto if approved. Well, when it comes to support for President Obama, at least one very vocal man at a Los Angeles fundraiser gives the commander-in-chief the thumbs down.
I want to
Christian God is the one and only true living God, the creator of heaven and the universe. Jesus Christ is God. Jesus Christ is God. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
I agree.
You're anti-Christ because you said.
Well, during that rant, the heckler called Obama the Antichrist. The rest of the crowd, clearly not in agreement with that man, they began chanting 4 more years to drown out the heckler. Well, when it comes to tithing, a 92-year-old Korean woman knows what it's all about. According to UCA News, the woman, who already gave an expensive piece of land and her house to the Archdiocese of Seoul, has now donated $935,000 to the church. The woman says she's lived without greed or waste of a penny. Well, have you heard that Pope Benedict is retiring next year? No, actually not. The Vatican is categorically denying that report. An Italian journalist recently reported that the Pope was considering stepping down next April when he turns 85. Speaking to reporters in Germany, though, the Vatican spokesman said Benedict showed great energy during his recent trip to his homeland, and he had, quote, no knowledge of plans for the Pope to step down. Well, stay with us. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, should insurance plans be mandated to cover the full cost of birth control? Welcome back. Well, when it comes to the Catholic Church, is the Obama administration getting its cues from Jay Leno and David Letterman? If that is the case, the U.S. Bishops' Conference is not laughing. Let me explain here. Sister Marianne Walsh, who serves as the Bishop's Director of Media Relations, says the Obama administration is following the lead of the late-night comics in dissing the church. Writing on the Bishop's Conference media blog, Sister Marianne cites as one example the decision by the Department of Health and Human Services to require most private health plans to fully cover birth control and voluntary sterilizations, with only very narrow exceptions. I had a chance to speak about this with Sister Marianne Walsh earlier today. Sister, thanks so much for joining us here today. We appreciate your time very much.
Oh, happy to be with you.
Well, in your blog entry last week, you sort of, I guess, used an analogy to talk about Health and Human Services and really the Obama administration kind of as a whole, comparing them to kind of like Leno and Letterman, or saying that maybe Leno and Letterman are maybe calling the shots for the administration. Tell our viewers, first of all, why make that analogy?
Well, I made the analogy because I wouldn't say that Leno and Letterman are calling the shots to the administration, but they are reflecting a tone of disdain for the church, particularly the Catholic Church. They make free, excuse me, they're free to make jokes which are tasteless and which ridicule the church, and they get their laughs. And maybe that's the stuff of late night comics, but what's of concern is that the same kind of disdain you see now moving into legislation in the federal government. The biggest example would be the regulations on HHS as to what group would be worthy of a religious exemption.
Sure, and you mentioned in there some issues that you have with the language, that religious exemption language. Talk to us about the issues that you had with that.
Well, there's a huge problem. When I saw the legislation, it said, yeah, we would give a religious exemption if everybody or most of the people you hire are Catholic, and most of the people you serve are Catholic, and you're really preaching religion when you're offering that service. Well, 1 out of 6 people in this country who goes into a hospital goes into a Catholic hospital. And, we certainly never say, oh, by the way, do you have a baptismal certificate when you arrive at the emergency room? And we're not teaching the 10 Commandments in between giving sutures. So it was the most bizarre understanding of religion that I have ever seen.
Right.
And you come to find out that the whole definition was crafted by the ACLU, a group which is not particularly friendly to the church.
Right. And if that current language is adopted, what could that possibly mean for Catholic groups and other religious groups who fall under this mandate?
Well, the issue in question here is whether or not the health insurance regulations or legislation now says that employers have got to provide for contraception and sterilization and some drugs which we consider causing abortion, they would have to be provided free of cost by the employer. Well, that's a real problem for the Catholic Church. We employ a lot of people, but there's no way that the Catholic Church can be true to its mission as a church. At the same time, it's promoting services which are antithetical to what Catholics believe. So that puts it's a real catch-22 for the church. How do you handle that? Other places have had rules where religious groups set up their own insurance companies or something to get around that. But this legislation doesn't allow for that. And they have until the Catholic, all religious groups, it affects every religious group, obviously. I speak about it from the Catholic perspective. They've gone until September 30th to point out their objections. Now, one group last week, the Catholic Health Association, sent comments to HHS pointing out, the seriousness of this problem and offering them some other suggestions, other ways to interpret what constitutes church ministry. These problems have been resolved a long time ago. Why HHS is suddenly coming up with a new definition is amazing to everyone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Catholic Health Association brought up, if I remember this correctly, was that a suggestion of going to the definition of a religious group that is used by the Internal Revenue Service, and that's a much broader definition. Is that a change that maybe you or the Bishops' Conference might be able to agree with?
Oh, I think so. I think that brings things closer to the status quo than what ACLU is pointing to. The Catholic Health Association also made a good point. They point out that Thomas Jefferson guaranteed the Ursuline sisters back in 1804 that their rights to govern they could have their institutions without interference from civil authority. I think that was the phrase he used, interference from civil authority. And because they were furthering the wholesome purposes of society, it will be assured it will meet all the protection which my office can give it. Now, that's going back to 1804.
Wow.
And Thomas Jefferson was not a particularly religious man, but he recognized the services that the church was providing.
All right. Well, Sister Mary Ann Walsh, Director of Media Relations with the U.S. Bishops' Conference, we're just out of time, but we thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Well, if you want to make your voice heard on this particular issue, you have until Friday, that's this Friday, September 30th, to comment on the decision by the Department of Health and Human Services. We've posted some more information on exactly how you can do that over on our blog. Go to currentsny.net, click Riding the Wave. We also have a link there to Sister Mary Ann's blog entry. Well, stay with us. There's more Currents ahead. When we return, he used to be a businessman, but now he wears a different kind of white collar.
I know you can't run the church like a business, but that doesn't mean you can't put, good business skills to use for the church.
Finally tonight, what is your vocation? Well, that may not be such an easy question to answer. And for the man you're about to meet, it's something that took just a bit of time to figure out. Father Bob Mucci was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Brooklyn just 2 years ago, but his route to the priesthood was anything but direct. He went from a white-collar job to, well, a much different white collar. His story was on tap at last night's Theology on Tap.
The ultimate goal of Theology on Tap is to bring speakers to a bar where, in today's modern society, this is a place where young professionals hang out, even for young Catholics. So in order to enrich their lives with a bit of spirituality, if you want to say that, we have these talks here at a very famous bar here in Midtown Manhattan.
We may not all be called to be priests or religious, but we are all called. God has a unique role for each one of us in His plan of salvation.
Tonight's talk is going to be opened up by Father Bob Mucci. He was going to talk about his vocation, but he's also going to talk to us tonight about our own vocation, how to find God's plan for our life, because he had a drastic change from being executive vice president, board of directors, to now a priest in a parish.
I started my career as an actuary and did well, and it was the kind of thing that as success came early and easily, I kept trying to convince myself that, well, maybe this is God's plan all along. I was on the board of directors, and we had a board meeting coming up, and the CFO came to me and said, we've got the board meeting tomorrow, and I found myself telling him, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm lector at Mass tomorrow morning. Wow. You realize you just blew off the board of directors because of some weekday Mass that you really have no obligation to be at. And so it really got me thinking, and I really do like to think all the skills that I picked up in my business career. I mean, I'm sure, I know you can't run the church like a business, but that doesn't mean you can't put, good business skills to use for the church. All these years that I had felt that this is what I was being called to do, I finally had the courage to take that step and to apply to the seminary, and it's really been great. Who are we to say? If God is calling you to do this, if this is what God wants out of you, why should we put a limit on what God can do?
I thought his story was really interesting just because a lot of people here in New York are very goal-oriented, and I feel that he did that in his life and was still able to, tend to his calling as a priest, and I think what he did was really great.
God doesn't stop talking just because you don't listen. He's still going to call you in the direction you're meant to go in, and he's still going to make it happen if you're open to him.
I was curious and interested to hear what he would have to say about the sacrifices he made and his journey through life. So yeah, it was definitely a draw for me.
I hope what people can take away from my talk is that, from my experience, when you're actually fulfilling that role that God has in mind to you, when your will is in sync with God's will, great things happen.
Very powerful story there, and definitely a change of direction in his life. That's what happens when you answer your true calling. Well, that is all for this edition of Currents. Until next time, be sure and visit us online. We're at currentsny.net. Also check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.